The 10 richest people of all time. When we compare fortunes over time, we find some surprises. Here are the 10 richest people of all centuries. Forbes magazine regularly publishes its rankings of the richest men and women in the world. After reigning supreme for almost 20 years, Microsoft boss Bill Gates has had to give way to Amazon boss Jeff Bezos. But at the height of Microsoft's market capitalization, Bill Gates reached a fortune of $101 billion, or $147 billion today after accounting for inflation, which is a lot more than Jeff Bezos' current $112 billion. Although these kinds of calculations are complicated to make over time, Time magazine has tried to shed some light on the great fortunes of this world throughout history. In the light of centuries and millennia, our two current billionaires are almost pale. To establish the calculation, Time used the work of a group of economists who shed light on the comparison of wealth over time. Roughly speaking, to be relevant, you have to compare the great fortunes of the past against the level of development of their time. To that must be added inflation, so that we can compare them with the great fortunes of today. $1 in the 18th century is not worth $1 today. Suddenly, the classification that will follow may hold some surprises for you. Number 10. Genghis Khan, 1162 to 1227. Fortune, land, a lot of land. Genghis Khan is first and foremost the king of military conquests. As a leader of the Mongol Empire, he managed to annex a territory that stretches from China to Europe, the largest empire in history, 33.2 million square kilometers in 1286 at its peak. But experts on the Mongol Empire are almost unanimous. Genghis Khan was not the type to hoard his wealth. On the contrary, Khan's generosity to his people was the key to his success. He also shared the spoils of his conquests with his soldiers and generals as well as their families. This allowed him to endure as the head of the empire. It's also remarkable that Khan, for the time, did not build any palaces for himself or for his family. Nothing. No temple, no tomb, not even a house. He was born in a yurt and died in a yurt. His funeral went without embellishment. The body was wrapped in felt, as customary. His burial was also kept secret. Even today, no one really knows where Genghis Khan was buried. Genghis Khan is considered one of the fathers of the modern world. He established laws in favor of women, prohibition of sale and adultery, and levied taxes. But among his opponents, Iraq and Iran, he's seen as a bloodthirsty warlord who caused enormous destruction through his conquests. He's widely recognized as an absolute master of the art of warfare, with bow and arrows and horses being his main weapons. Genghis Khan was voted the Man of the Millennium by the Washington Post in 1995. Number 9. Bill Gates, 1955 to present. Fortune, $147 billion in 1999. While Bill Gates was recently passed by Amazon's boss, Jeff Bezos, he remains the richest man of the late 20th century or early 21st century. At its peak, the fortune of the boss of Microsoft reached $101 billion, or $147 billion today. In 2006, he decided to devote 95% of his fortune to a foundation that bears his name. Education, health, man is a philanthropist. But this donation is also a way of detaching oneself from the influence of the states, since this money is tax-exempt. His foundation now has more budgets than the World Health Organization. Note that to establish its rankings, Forbes takes into account the number of shares the billionaire holds, multiplied by the value of that share. Money in the bank account and real estate are therefore not taken into account. Number 8. Alain Leroux, 1040 to 1093. Fortune, $194 billion. He's the nephew of William the Conqueror, 1027 to 1087, King of England and Duke of Normandy. He participated in the Norman quest of England and became one of the richest barons in the kingdom. Originally from Brittany, he probably fought in the Battle of Hastings, 1066. For his feats of arms, Alain Leroux receives a lot of land in Yorkshire mainly. It has 440 seigneuries where the economic and legal framework of the population applies, spread over 11 countries. Alain Leroux is often considered the richest man in England of all time. In a book called The Richest of the Rich, Philip Beresford and William D. Rubenstein estimate his fortune at $164 billion today. Each of his land earns him a huge amount of money. Number 7. John D. Rockefeller, 1839 to 1937. Fortune, $341 billion. It's skyrocketing. Rockefeller made his fortune in the oil industry. By 1880, he controlled 90% of oil production in the United States. According to the New York Times, his wealth was valued at $1.5 billion in 1918, equivalent to 2% of the U.S. GDP at the time. This represents almost $350 billion today. Rockefeller is considered the first billionaire of the contemporary era. He's the perfect representation of the famous American self-made man. His company, Standard Oil, would later become Esso and then ExxonMobil. A very believer and supporter of Abraham Lincoln, he'll be designated a member of the Republican Party for life. He's one of the elderly philanthropists of the contemporary era. He also created his own foundation, offering him some $600 million. It still exists and is intended to promote scientific progress in all countries of the world. It'll also help to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, 1919, as the U.S. Senate slipped towards isolationism. Number 6. Andrew Carnegie, 1835 to 1919. Fortune, $372 billion. If Rockefeller is a name well known around the world, Carnegie is much less. Yet, he is the richest modern man of all time. This Scottish immigrant made his fortune in steel. By selling U.S. Steel to J.P. Morgan for $480 million in 1901, he became the richest man in the world. His fortune represented 2.1% of U.S. GDP. In 2014, this represented the sum of $372 billion. He too is the perfect embodiment of the American dream. At 13, he started in the textile industry as a simple worker. He then decides to educate himself by reading books located in a library close to his home. Like Rockefeller, Carnegie is a believer, Puritan, and philanthropist. But a very relative philanthropy. For him, society is built around social Darwinism. The less socially able are put aside. The result is a class society in which the richer sections of the population must collect money, then redistribute it to the poorest, less able populations. Number 5. Joseph Stalin, 1878 to 1953. Fortune, control over 9.6% of world GDP. The little father of people is also one of the greatest dictators of contemporary times. Joseph Stalin had near total control over one of the richest states in the world. The land is fully nationalized there. The economy and the central power are one. And he's the sole decision maker, knocking out his rivals as he ascends. In 1950, 3 years before Stalin's death, the OECD estimated the wealth of the USSR at 9.6% of GDP. This would represent $3 trillion today. So admittedly, this money did not belong to him strictly speaking, but he could use it as he wished without any constraint. His power extended over an area that made up 1/6 of the planet. Under Stalin, the USSR carried out 1.5 million executions, deported 5 million people to the gulags, of which nearly 2 million were killed there. To this must be added the million prisoners of war and German civilians, while including the victims of the Great Famine. In all, the figure climbs to more than 20 million victims under his reign. Number 4. Akbar, 1542 to 1605. Fortune, control over 25% of global GDP. Jalaluddin Muhammad Akbar is considered the greatest Mughal emperor. His empire extends over a territory that corresponds to present-day India, but under Muslim control. The Mughals use the Mansabdar system. That is, territories over which an officer is appointed to raise income from the land. In return for this income, the emperor may require soldiers depending on the size of the territory. The advantage of the emperor is that these officers were not chosen hereditarily, which left him a great deal of leeway. Divided into 15 provinces, the empire is extremely efficient at collecting taxes, which will contribute to its wealth. Akbar, however, remains very tolerant in terms of religion. At time oppressed, non-Muslims are gradually accepted there. The emperor will even marry a Hindu princess in an attempt to ease tensions. He'll also be at the origin of a religion which will mix Islam, Christianity, and Jainism. At its peak, the Akbar Empire accounted for 25% of global GDP, which is comparable to the then British Empire, then at its height of the English Renaissance. But the wealth of Mughal high society exceeded that of Europeans. Number 3. Song Shenzhong, 1048 to 1085. Fortune: control over 25 to 30% of global GDP. Shenzhong is the 6th emperor of the Song dynasty in China. He's considered one of the fathers of the modern welfare state. He's developing major reforms to improve the condition of the peasants and the poor. He's also considered a great warlord. For many historians, the Song Empire is one of the most powerful empires of all time. This wealth comes mainly from its efficiency in collecting taxes, in addition to technological innovations, printing, astronomy, gunpowder, the windmill, or the first appearance of the banknote. Only the Mughal Empire will manage to end it. It was also an extremely centralized empire, which gave the emperor immense power, especially economically. Number 2. Augustus, 63 AV to 14 APR. Fortune: $4.6 trillion. Again, in his day, the Roman Empire controlled almost 30% of the world's GDP. But in addition to having control over this empire, Augustus had a wealth that's beyond comprehension. It would now represent $4.6 trillion today. For example, he owned all of Egypt as a back garden. Augustus is known to be the adopted son of Julius Caesar and the first man to be crowned emperor in history. When his father becomes famous for his warlike exploits, this will bring him wealth and peace to the empire. He introduced the Pax Romana and gave the city of Rome its splendor. Augustus is also the introduction of Roman law, the construction of forums, courthouses of the time, and the invention of police and firefighters. His reform of the tax system will also allow the empire to become richer. Number 1. Mansa Musa, 1280 to 1337. Fortune: impossible to describe. The king of Timbuktu is considered the richest man of all time. For one simple reason: his empire of Mali was the main producer of gold from 1312 to 1332, a time when demand for gold was very high. His fortune, however, remains very difficult to assess, because the documents are rare, even non-existent. Some accounts speak of pilgrimage to Mecca, in which its spending was so extravagant that it caused a currency crisis in Egypt. We're talking about dozens of camels carrying galore gold. Other texts report an army of 200,000 soldiers, including 40,000 archers, which is enormous for the time. Rudolph Ware of the University of Michigan uses these words to describe him. There are representations of Mansa Musa where he's seen carrying a gold scepter on a golden throne with the other hand holding a golden cup, all with a gold crown on his head. Imagine all the gold a man can own and double it. When no one can assess your wealth, you are very, very rich. Leave a comment below, and as always, make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel so that you never miss a video.